Welcome to Redeeming Missions, an every home podcast where we explore the heart of what it means to carry Christ to our world. I'm Tanner Peake, and I'm so glad that you're joining me today. Welcome to another episode of Redeeming Missions. I'm Tanner, and today we're going to do something real experimental, and we're going to flip the script. And so today the host is actually my good friend, Jesse Engel.
That's right.
And it's his job to take us wherever he's going to take us.
I'm going to interview you.
Yeah, good.
No, I think been looking forward to this, Tanner. You know, it's been so cool seeing you in this seat and just your kind of natural curiosity and your enthusiasm, your love of people's stories. But I think we really wanted our listeners they've been experiencing you, they've been getting to know you, sure. But to really just flip the seats and put you in the hot seat, and for you to tell your story and some of your journey, and we'll see, you know, where that takes us. Story is a unique thing. I'm sure we'll find some little side roads. It could get real.
Dicey.
It could get dicey. So Tanner Peake, what is your story? I mean, tell us what people don't know about you and your origin and how the Lord has led you.
Before every one of these podcasts, I tell our guests, I say, this is so easy.
Easy.
I'm just asking you, just tell your story. And when you're on this side of it, actually trying to tell your story concisely is not as easy as it sounds. I was born.
It's easy. You got this, man. You got this.
I was born. Let's just start there. I was born of a woman in central Montana and out in the plains, Montana. The hospital that I was born at today doesn't even deliver babies.
Dang.
So it's a small town of probably 300, 400 people. It was a railroad town that was abandoned when the railroad pulled out. So there's just nothing really in terms of industry that attracts people there, not what it used to be. So I was born there. I was born to a family. My dad ran the mill, which is, for those who don't know, he bought grain from farmers. And
you gotta bring it to us city folk here.
Yeah.
Cheerios.
Yeah. He bought grain from farmers, and then was a part of just the kind of the distribution line, the supply line, getting that to places where they make bread and cereal. So I grew up really just in kind of an expansive world, small town, in a lot of ways like a feral dog. You just kind of wandered around, go on my bike with no shoes, no shirt, down to the swimming pool, play football, shoot bottle rockets, shoot gophers. Sorry for those of you that are really protective of gophers, but that was my life. I didn't really have a faith. I grew up in the church. I grew up doing a lot of kind of churchy things, but I never really had a faith. And my childhood, I would say, was overall really good. Like most people that are listening to this, childhood has its own aspects that are really challenging. And I think we all have, that's part of probably every person's story is some kind of adversity that they have to overcome. And that was the case for me. I had just really some complicated relationships that really marked me as a young child. But part of my story is my grandpa, who grew up 3 or 4, let me say, it was probably 3 or 4 houses, but about a half a mile away.
You're painting the picture of where you grew up.
Yeah. And so he lived just down the road and was just such to me, was just such a gentle man. And I was twitchy, Tanner. Even then, I was outgoing and talked fast and just really hyperactive. And he would come, and I would go to his house, and he would take me under his arm, and we'd go out to the country, and we'd look at just all of the land. My grandpa was a lover of the land, so we would just drive the land, the prairies of Montana. And he was a big rancher, and so he knew the land as well as anyone. And so he had retired by the time he was living next to me. He had retired. His sons had taken over the ranch. So my grandpa was just this presence in my life. He meant so much to me. And in a lot of ways, I look back at him as a refuge in my story. As I grew older, I definitely took a turn away from my faith or any kind of faith that I had. I, as most, I think, Central Montanan young men, I cared probably the most about girls and maybe some partying in there as well. And but my grandpa died when I was 16 years old. I was a freshman in high school, and grandpa passed on, and that was really traumatic to me. Even to this day, I can't think of another person that's passed on in my life that elicited so much grief. When he died, just an overwhelming sense of grief for me. And when he died, grandpa had maybe 40, 50 grandkids. But as my story goes, I was eventually inherited, kind of through my parents, I inherited some money to go on a missions trip, which is really comical. From grandpa. Grandpa. From my grandpa, in my grandpa's
So you were
death.
kind of singled out.
Yeah. And truthfully, is wild because grandpa never left. I mean, grandpa was like his mom was a true homesteader, and he gathered wild horses off the Montana prairie. He was not somebody who went on missions trips, but I think he saw something in me that would be attracted to the nations.
Curious.
Yeah, that was curious. So I agreed to go on a missions trip for grandpa's sake, first of all. And then secondly, I thought might be a prime location to go flirt with some pretty Christian girls.
Still following that. Yeah. Still following that thread a little bit. Hey, that's just normal.
Yeah. So that was that. I ended up going to India, experienced just radical culture shock.
Where did you go in India?
I was in Delhi.
Okay.
India, in really old Delhi, which is kind of the worst part of Delhi. And one day driving,
never before had traveled internationally. 16. I mean, you're painting this picture of like pretty rural, maybe not like totally rural, but even compared to a lot of people probably listening, maybe some rural, but pretty rural, not very exposed to kind of much beyond this kind of Montana.
I had never even experienced humidity before. So landing in India,
painful.
Yeah, I mean,
it's painful.
If those of you who have been to the great country of India know that
it's a little
high humidity.
Sticky.
Yeah, it smells different. So many people.
It's overwhelming.
So I was overwhelmed, but I remember driving in a bus one day down the road and looking out the bus window and seeing a little boy. I think it was a boy. And kind of a makeshift shack, and looking out kind of across this field at this little boy standing there, and realizing for the first time in my life that, man, some people were born into very different circumstances than me. And this little boy, by no choice of his own, was born into just really abject poverty. And something about that was just very sobering to me. And I knew for the first time in my life that I was going to be held accountable in life for what I did with what I knew, and what I'd been taught by my parents, what I'd been taught about in terms of God from my parents and my grandpa, what had been demonstrated to me about God through grandpa. And I think I also saw something of that boy's suffering, and it shook me. I think we all have suffering in our life in some ways, and that was probably saw myself in that little boy more than I knew at the time. I look back now and think that. But that was a radical turning point in my life. I said, Lord, I don't think I'm going to be able to stop cussing, and I have no intention of stopping drinking. But if you're real, which I think you are, I'm in. I'll do my best. I don't want to say I was negotiating with God, but I was trying to come as honestly as I could to him. This is just who I'm going to be. And ended up coming back. Man, I got to speed up here, but I ended up coming back really on fire for God and like real zealous. That's just kind of my temperament. You know this about me. When something sinks in, it sinks in pretty deep for me.
Yeah.
Came back, started a Bible club in my school.
Super Bible club,
Super
right?
Bible club. And that was, a part of my journey. The through line though, through my story to bring me to where I'm at now is I've always been drawn to the diversity of the peoples of the earth. I think sometimes we say that as the nations. America is technically one of the nations. And so I don't necessarily.
There's some jargon there, right? The nations.
Yeah, the nations makes it kind of objectifies them.
Sure.
But I think I've always been intrigued by different cultures, and I think I'm still just like I was on that moment that I encountered the Lord in India. I think a lot of the ways I encounter God is through my eyes, through what I see. I think that's just who I am. And so I've done a lot of different things in my life, but it's always kind of been centered actually around the peoples of the earth. And really, even in ministry, that's been my heart, is to see people, who they are and how God sees them, and to minister from that place of, I think in scripture, it says that Jesus saw people 70 times. It says that in the gospel.
Really?
That Jesus saw. And I think that's been my way, just my heart is to want to see people. And so that's my story.
Pause there real quick, because
sure.
I know this about you. We've been friends for a long time.
20 years.
Close to 20 years. But even hearing you, I just want to lean into something, because even hearing you tell your own story and a phrase that you said, and I know this podcast space is like, and just story, you've admitted it, like how deep do you go? You said, you were in India and you see this little boy and you actually felt like to a degree you saw yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe even just like a sense of that little boy needing rescue.
Yeah.
And needing care.
Sure.
And I think even you've told it, but that's kind of who there's something really just beautiful about how your grandpa is tied.
Yeah.
You were a little boy and you admitted to this like adversity and some really difficult things. It doesn't have to, like you said, everyone has it.
Yeah.
In the midst of shooting gophers and riding around on your dirt bike and this kind of beautiful like Montana childhood, there's some I know you well enough to really name like there's some suffering, some darkness.
Yeah.
I want to hear you just lean into, because I think you do this. You do see people, but man, you hit something there of like you saw yourself.
Yeah.
To talk more about that and how even your seeing of people is kind of tied to that journey. Because I'm just thinking over 20 years, I've seen those things move together where you've seen yourself, both in your goodness and your brokenness, and you've seen where the Lord has come to you, and that seems to be such a motivator of your seeing of people and vice versa. There's something beautiful there.
I think you're saying it pretty well. So I'm just kind of building on what you said. I think that, first of all, I'd say I think every person matters. I think in the economy of God, in the kingdom, every person matters. But that doesn't mean that some people aren't left behind, that they're not forgotten. And I think there's a lot of groups of people.
They can matter and still be left behind.
Yeah. And so I think there's just a lot of people around the world that are forgotten. I think of the top of my head, you have gypsies and minority groups and the marginalized and the handicapped, the mentally, those who suffer with mental illness. These are people that get left behind for various reasons. And I think, we use in missions terminology, we call that unreached.
Sure.
They're the unreached. And I don't particularly love that terminology. I think it's more than they're unreached. I think sometimes they're just ill-forgotten. They are just absolutely been neglected. And I think when I was looking out at that little boy, I was seeing the unreached. I think I was seeing part of the forgotten. I mean, India, you know, this has some of the biggest slums in the world, the poor. And this is a group of people that the poor of India, I think for the Western listener, would have no reference point for the type of poverty that we're talking about. It's just subsistence living, hand to mouth. Even in some of those slums, you have rampant disease.
Yeah.
And these are people that are forgotten largely by the world. And I think when I looked at it, that little boy, I think my desire, what moved in my heart is that we couldn't leave that little boy behind. That we can't leave people like this behind. And that I was in some way responsible for that. Like I had to do something in my life to make sure that little boy.
That's that accountability
100%.
part of what you really sensed in that moment.
But me, I think, like, as you said so well, I had adversity in my life. And in a lot of ways, I was the little boy that didn't want to be left behind. I was seeing him, but like I said, I was seeing a reflection of myself even in that little boy. And I'm not unreached in the sense that that I'm an unreached people or I'm marginalized. I think you can look at me. I'm a white male living in the most prosperous nation of the planet. I'm not marginalized.
You're not overly identifying with that, but maybe at a soul level of a shared experience in humanity of
Some of my narrative and my story of abuse in my life meant that I felt like I didn't have a defender at times. I didn't have a protector. And there's something as a little boy that you metabolize that as being forgotten.
Yes.
I'm on my own. No one's going to remember me. I'm going to have to be on my own. And so seeing that little boy, I think just connected some dots for me. And I knew that would be my life calling, is to not leave people behind. Of course, there's over 8 billion people on the planet. I can't ensure that every person isn't left behind in some way, but I think I've made it my ambition to see what God would put in front of me to see.
I'm kind of stuck on this moment. I mean, I've heard you tell this story, I don't know, a dozen or more times, but in the rearview mirror of where you're sitting today as the president of an organization, this feels like that moment, like the rest of your story has been a continuation of that with many twists and turns. But how would you speak to where you're at today, or maybe next chapter after that, of how the Lord kind of led you? I mean, you consider this kind of your salvation, awakening, you know, it wasn't this like prayer, like come into my heart, Lord. It was connected to purpose and to mission and to a sense of this is what I'll do, not with the clarity that, I mean, bro, I knew you in your early 20s and you wouldn't have been like, I know it's leading to the day when I will be the president of an organization, but I see the through line as we're sitting here, and just curious as you sit here, how did you see kind of God unfold that, probably what you didn't even know, but you can look back at now as this seed, this awakening, and how is that mode? I mean, give us kind of scene 2. I know there's a lot of detail in between, but how did that lead you to today? And maybe how is it even motivating you as you lead? Yeah.
I think I came home from this trip. I graduated high school. And after that, I ended up going and traveling around Southeast Asia for a period of time. And the fast story is I felt like I wanted to invest in people like that little boy, but I remember hearing God so clearly say, I just want you to be useful. And so because of that, I felt compelled to go back to college or go to college. I had never been to college. And ended up getting a political science degree, and then eventually a master's in business. And always knew somewhere in my heart that I would land on serving the poor and serving the forgotten in some way. And I always just knew I had this gravity in my heart. You know, my calling for me was, from the moment that I had that awakening, my calling was steadfast. I've always known that would be what I'm about. And so I heard about
wherever I
was planted. And I didn't know who Every Home for Christ was at that period of time. Not in any kind of articulate way. And yet I had a friend who introduced me to this ministry, and in Colorado. I was living somewhere else at the time. And I came here, and like I said, there's this through line of seeing in my life. I went to a room in this building, and there were faces of people from all over the world that we serve. And I'd never seen something like that. I'd never seen a ministry that had such diversity in it. And then on top of that, knowing what the vision and mission of Every Home for Christ was, or learning about that its very mission and vision was literally to not leave anybody behind. And to carry the love of Christ to every last single person, whether they're living on, there's two people living on an island, or it's a city. Every Home for Christ is going to get to the very ends of the earth. And so I came here, I fell in love with this people, this tribe. I think people are going to think I'm not being honest, but I had zero ambition even for promotion within the organization. I think I just wanted to be a part of anything that I could do here. I don't think I just don't even think that was in my mind.
I have this clear memory.
Uh-oh.
We were living in the same city, and then you moved out here to Colorado. I was still back there, and we talked. I'm not a very good long distance friend, but we talked from time to time. And I remember the excitement you're talking. I mean, I remember you saying so vividly, Jess, there's this guy named Sam Telebella Singham. And for one, I was like, what is that name? And I now, our Sri Lanka director, and you were talking about Jacob George. You were naming, you were naming
people I still love.
People that had awakened something in there was it wasn't normal Tanner excited about you're always excited. You're that's who you are. But this was something so unique, and like, I'm just reflecting on that with a sense of like, you're still saying the same thing 20 years later, bro.
I think I still feel just as excited too. I mean, even as you're talking, I don't know who on earth listens to this podcast, and this is going to seem like I'm just plugging for Every Home for Christ. I guess I really am. I don't think there is a group and a tribe that exists. I'm just being genuine. I know a lot of other ministries. Like I know the leaders of a lot of different ministries. The vision and the mission of Every Home for Christ to get to every person is spectacular.
Yeah.
And not just like we do it. We don't just use high rhetoric. And, we kind of bloviate, exaggerate. Oh, we want to do this. No. This is a group of people that literally, have maps in their office and are mapping neighborhoods to try to figure out where people are actually at, and then sending people to them. I think I'm just as excited as I was then. Now I know these people more. I know so many more. I have more names that come to my mind, even on this podcast, the people that I can interview.
We've seen some of that, like your love and your excitement, your astonishment at sitting with, especially those folks from around the world, and talking about what they do and why and their heart, and it just seems to still be like the motivator for what you do.
Yeah, and I think, back to what I said, I think my calling and just my conviction, I think our stories matter. And in my story, it was always about the forgotten.
Yeah.
And it's still about the forgotten to me. And Every Home for Christ is, as far as I'm concerned, does more to not forget than any other people that I know. Just hands down. I don't think there's a better group of people that doesn't forget. So that's what keeps me here. I'm now the leader of this ministry, and which is all you do as a leader of a ministry like Every Home for Christ is just serve the heart and the soul of that ministry and keep that flame alive. To keep banging the drum that we're not gonna forget people. But I'm not the most eloquent. I mean, there's a lot of people way more qualified. I'm quite young for my role, but I do know I carry the same heart and the same calling as this people.
What about what you just said is bringing those tears to your eyes? I don't know if people can see, and you're not a big public crier. You're a very tender.
Yeah, my kids always say they've never seen me cry.
Yeah, you're a tender. You're a tender man. You're tender with the Lord. You're tender with people. But what about this moment is making you feel? What are you feeling?
Well, I just know it used to be a couple people that I knew that, this Sam Telebellasingam, who's no longer serving as a leader for us in Sri Lanka, or Jacob George, who's since retired, but is spiritual
embodied
father.
Something.
Yeah, they embodied. But now I have so many more faces. I just got back from Poland sitting with two different of our directors in Eurasia or in Ukraine. And they're telling me about all of the things that we do to not leave people behind, that we're doing education today for a generation of kids in Ukraine that don't have schools and don't have dads. We're being chaplains. We're sending people to the front lines just to not forget soldiers on the front lines. I mean, these are just the stories that I've heard. I was just a story from the Middle East about us going into hospitals. And one of the stories that I heard is going into a hospital and seeing the gospel preached to the lonely and the despairing. And so I think what makes me emotional is that what I loved about Every Home for Christ is so much more animated now. I know the people, I know their hearts, I get to hear the stories. I just don't know that I keep saying the same thing, broken record. I just don't think there's a people quite like the people that make up this ministry.
Hey, we here at Every Home want to wish you a very Merry Christmas. In this season, when we celebrate how Jesus came to earth and lived with us, our excitement and dedication is renewed to carry Jesus' life-changing love to every human heart. Around the world, believers serving with Every Home are navigating rivers, scaling mountains, risking persecution, and seeking out marginalized people to reach everyone with the love of Jesus. Join Every Home on this incredible Christmas journey when you give at everyhome.org/give.
Yeah, this is your tribe.
You can't. Yeah.
I mean, your heart
Yes.
is very, very big. You're not a tribalist in the sense of I'm only with these people, but there's a loyalty and a love, and I think I even hear you bleeding what you see, but also what you desire.
Sure.
For us to become.
Sure. Yeah.
To be deepened.
Yeah.
As you look at the horizon line for the ministry, talk about that for a minute. What do you?
Yeah.
What do you? You just wrote a little book, not that little, but just putting your heart on paper, literally called Love Mission from the Inside Out, which is what we're talking about today, right? Like the fact that the Lord saw you, the Lord encountered you through your grandpa. You've seen people carry. I mean, this whole thing has a love narrative. What? This is not like a pitch for the book, but this is, I mean, your story, not maybe in the same way we're talking about it today, but this is your story, your heart,
message
on paper, a core message of your life. Like, tell me about that and what you see, what you hope for in terms of this tribe that the Lord has connected you to, called you to serve, called you to lead in.
Yeah, that's a big question. This is a shameless plug for the for the book. You can get it on Amazon. So go and buy that. I'm trying to look. I don't know what camera to look at, but I'll look at them all. There you go. Shameless plug. I think in terms of, of the future, like you said, this is I don't think I have anything else to say in terms of except love. I just don't think I think it's so clear, to love, not just in rhetoric or in speech, but to love in truth and deed. The idea that God is love. Paul said, "I'm compelled by the love of Christ." Paul prayed that we would know the length, the width, the height, the depth of his love. He wrote in 1 Corinthians that unless our motivation is love, I mean, it's all I've got to say, and I feel like it's it's the primary thrust of the New Testament, the first and second commands. And so if you were going to ask me, what Every Home for Christ will continue to look like, or what it's going to look like in the future, is that we would be a tribe of radical love. There's a lot of people, just to be honest, there's a lot of people that might preach the gospel out of fear. Maybe they feel like they've been told by their Sunday school teacher or their pastor that unless they, if they don't preach the gospel, the blood is on their hands.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that preach the gospel out of shame.
Yeah.
They feel like they got to do it to make up. They have to do it to atone for maybe their lack of spiritual discipline or something like that. There's a lot of different reasons that people, quote unquote, preach the gospel. And yet I see us as a tribe where this is crystal clear. This is articulate. We love people because he first loved us. Just that simple.
Yeah.
And I believe that when we're motivated by love, we'll go even further than we already go. That love will carry us much further than obligation would carry us. Love will carry us much further than money can carry us. Take a nation like Somalia. 18 million people, only about 4,000 Christians in the entire country. 18 million, 4,000 believers, one of the highest rates of social persecution and government persecution, one of the most difficult places on the planet. When we talk about not leaving somebody behind, no amount of cash, no amount of obligation or shame or guilting the church is going to actually carry his name and his fame to the people of Somalia. It will be radical lovers. Just there's no other way. There's going to be people that have been so transformed and so provoked and catalyzed by the love of Christ that they are compelled, like Paul, to go to the middle of Somalia, just out in the middle of nowhere, even though if that might risk their life. And we have people all around the world right now in nations. I could list out nations. They're living like that right now. And so I don't know that I'm saying something new. I don't know, in this book, there's a bazillion books written on love. I think what I'm just saying, I want to draw a line in the sand and say, this is our why.
Yeah.
For sure, this is our why. Without excuse, without apology, we are a people that are going to be compelled by the love of Christ, and we're not going to forget a person.
Yeah.
Because God's love doesn't forget a single person around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes me pumped.
Let's go, dude. Let's go. I mean, it's really in light of his love that we're seen. I mean, I'm still stuck on this moment of you encountering yourself, looking out the window of a bus, a little boy. I mean, it's God's love directed towards humans, towards a rural Montanan and a poor kid in India, and none are left behind. And I mean, I think even for me hearing that today, I'm reminded that God loves me. And even in this moment, I want to love. Like it has a contagious, I think you said the word like transformational. It's not transactional. It's not robotic. It's this is real.
Yeah.
And it's what we want to do, and we want to be a part of a tribe of people. And I think me and you have even had this conversation of the hope that on this podcast, people who listen in would feel maybe that your story or other stories resonate with them. And ultimately it's this message that resonates with them, that they're loved, that they're seen, and that God has called them in the world to be on mission with him, to love, to see. And so I think that actually leads us to the moment of the podcast. The moment that you always bring people to. And Tanner, I think just thank you, man, for sharing your story. I know you so well. I know there's so many other twists and turns, but I think that through line is so clear today. But everyone that you have on this podcast, you know what's coming right now.
Yeah.
Gets asked this question from you with some varying explanation, but this is your chance to, in a personal way, answer the question that you always ask. What does it mean to you to carry Christ?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah, we could do a whole other. You want to start another podcast right now? Okay.
Yeah. You know, the story that I share, I've shared a lot of times in this podcast, is that this language originated for me. It became real to me after reading, you know, a Life magazine that I picked up in the
Is this the
line at the grocery store.
actual?
Yeah.
The actual one.
This is it. I mean, this is, you can't see. If you can't see, you can't see. If you're not watching this video, you're listening. I'm holding up a Life magazine.
They can see.
Of Mother Teresa. It says her life and her mission. And I think we know Mother Teresa. We know who she is and the impact that she's made. Also in India. So something significant about that, me personally. But as I was reading this one morning, she had a vision statement, her own kind of purpose statement. And it was to carry Christ to the most marginalized of India. And it's a little bit of my summary. I could look it up. I think it's on page like 70 or something. But that's my paraphrase. But what stuck out to me is that idea of carrying Christ. And that language, there's something about that language that just struck me in my heart, that she wanted to go. If you know about Mother Teresa, she wanted to go to the depths of the slum. She wanted to go to where that little boy was. She wanted to go to the hardest and the darkest places, that she didn't want to be the church of the rich.
Yeah.
She felt like the church was to be the church of the poor and the marginalized. And so she went. That's what she did. And so that language to her was about carrying. It was literally about going. And that's language that we've adopted everyone with Christ. In fact, our vision statement is to carry Christ to every person in every place in every generation.
Yeah.
And so to carry, to continue on maybe a legacy like a Mother Teresa, that we would go to places where no one else is even going, that we would get to the last home, to the last person, that we would show up on the thresholds of people's lives with love, that we would bring a new message. And I think, you know, we've been talking about seeing. I think carry Christ to me has really three different components. I think the first is seeing. I think that we carry Christ when we look out on our world and we see them. When we get gas and we go in and pay for that gas at the desk or at the counter, that we would see the man or the woman that we're paying, that the person, the gas station attendant, that we would actually see them, or that we would see the child in need in our community. We'd see the single mom.
Yeah.
We'd see our neighbor, that we would see, that we would slow down and stop. That's one of the ways that we carry Christ, is just simply giving our time and our attention to people that are in need. It's actually to see. I already said this, Jesus 70 times in the New Testament, Jesus says that Jesus saw. This is a part of Jesus' ministry. Do you know what happened before he healed? Or he spoke, he saw. And so Jesus had an attention span that actually is a prerequisite of carrying the full extent of the gospel. And he was able to do that. But the second component is that actually that we would show, that we'd show Christ's love. And one of the ways that we do show, just like Mother Teresa, is we show up. We actually arrive at people's lives. That's what Jesus did to us. We're in, right now, as we're recording this, we're in the Advent season.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we celebrate is Jesus' arrival.
Yeah.
It's the way he arrived. He came to humanity. He took on flesh, became a baby, entered into our suffering, our muck and mire, and our pain, and joined us as in humanity. He joined humanity in our plight. So what's showing is, in terms of carrying Christ, is going to where people are, meeting people where they are. It's radical generosity. It's showing the love of Christ through our actions.
Yeah, demonstrating
day in and day out, through our character, through the way that we live our lives, the way that we just live. So it's to see, it's to show, and then lastly, it's to speak. I think when if we've been seeing people well and we've been showing Christ well, the speak part is easy.
Yeah.
I have friends all of the time that'll ask me, hey, tell me about the Christ that you serve, about the God you serve. That's not because I came and imposed something on them.
You didn't just show up and start like,
No, I didn't come and like Bible bash him or anything like that. It's just the speak is easy. And when we have real experience with Christ, we have a real vibrant relationship with Christ, it's easy to talk about him. And so I think a lot of times evangelism has only been thought about from that last standpoint, that evangelism equals speaking. And what I want to do is I want to redefine that. I want to say, no, evangelism is not just speaking. It's demonstrating and it's seeing. These other elements have to be involved in the stew of evangelism. And so that's to me, carrying Christ is seeing, showing, speaking, being like Mother Teresa, being like Jesus, and living our lives with radical love.
So good, man. Well, Tanner, thank you for sharing your story. I think I'm sitting here just struck with, and this isn't, to puff you up. This is something we'd say sitting down having a cup of coffee without microphones on, but you live these words, and I of course,
I hope so.
And I think I can see afresh, and I hope people feel it where they're sitting today through the testimony of your life, just Christ's desire to arrive, to show up, to see them, and also to motivate them to live in a particular way. Yeah. And so just thank you, man, for your story, for how you're leading, how you're being who you are, man. It's beautiful.
Of course. Amen. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I hope that was entertaining. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back again.
Thank you for joining us today on the Redeeming Missions podcast. If you like what you heard, we encourage you to visit everyhome.org/redeemingmissions to find all past episodes and learn more about supporting the efforts of Every Home to carry Christ to everyone, everywhere, in every generation. Echoing the prayer of St. Patrick, Christ with us, Christ before us, Christ behind us, Christ in us. Let us carry Christ to our world. Until next time.